Hello, and welcome to We'll Tell You What We're Reading, our monthly YouTube show in which we talk about books that we're reading. As always, I am joined by my colleagues, Louise Goldstein, Liz Rior, and Greg Carter, and I am yours truly, Laura Bernheim. Today is the day after Festive Sweater Day at the Waltham Public Library, but I decided to continue the fun by just chilling. This is also our last meeting, or our last recording, I should say, of 2022. So if you're watching, of 2021, oh dear. So if you're watching this in the new year, we wish you a happy new year and hope 2021 was good for you and 2022 will be even better. So please join us right after the new year on Monday, January 3rd. We will be discussing Tell Us What You're Reading. Greg and I will be hosting that. And that is something in which you can participate and, again, tell us what you're reading. So kind of like this, but without the recording. We also have several book clubs coming up. We actually have our entire year planned for book clubs. So if you go to our website and click on our page for book clubs, you can see all the dates and titles that we're reading. We are very excited. And as always, we want to thank the friends of the Waltham Public Library who make all of our programming possible. We are very grateful to them, and especially this time of year, it is so wonderful to have such wonderful friends. Without further ado, we're going to continue with our program, and my colleague Greg is going to go and tell you about what he's been reading.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. So I guess I have a theme going on, trying to be a little festive for this time of year. So let's get started. Right, and now, bear with me one moment. All right, so first book that I have read in this past month is Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Hadn't read it for a while. It's been considered a classic and actually kind of the basis for many traditions of like the modern day Christmas story. So I figured I'd read it. And I don't really have much to say because, quite honestly, my general consensus is it's fine. Like, it's a good book, but for those of you who don't know what it's about this guy by the name of Ebenezer Scrooge, who just is kind of grumpy, he's a jerk, and to everybody in his life, and as a result, he gets visited by three spirits, and they show him the error of his ways, the past, the present, the future. And if my tone sounds like I'm knocking it, I'm not. I think it's actually a pretty solid story. It's a story that I feel like almost everybody in modern day, like America and Britain, have heard, because there are so many different interpretations, different ways of telling it, from the Muppets doing it, which, by the way, is the best interpretation of this story ever. Michael Caine is just flawless in that, to like a Matthew McConaughey Ghost of Girls' Friends Past, which doesn't even really have anything to do with Christmas, just they're using the theme. So I feel kind of bad. It's one of those things where you read it and you're like, this isn't very original, but it is, because it is the original story. If you're one of the few people who haven't read it, I would recommend it, especially if you like Christmas, and especially if you like kind of a little bit of an eerie vibe to your Christmas, because this is essentially a Christmas ghost story. And fun fact, I did not know this, but back in the old days, telling ghost stories during Christmas was actually a highly valued and recommended tradition, which I personally think we should bring back. I like a little spookiness and things going bump in the night for the season, but also it's a story that's pretty much based on hope and improving for the better. So that's really all I got to say. Speaking of spooky holiday traditions, my next book, it follows a similar vein, but it's about a different holiday. Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins by Eric Kimmel. For those of you who haven't read this when you were a young child, this was kind of a staple for me. a number of my Jewish friends would tell me like, "Oh, you think like Christmas Carol's spooky? Then it's like you gotta read this book." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, I gotta try that." And Herschel of, I think it's Ostropol, is this actual real person who lived in the early 18th and 19th centuries. But he's become part of a number of stories where he's almost been kind of like mythified, mythologized, and become kind of almost like a very similar vein of like a trickster deity, where he is, or a trickster character, I should say, where he would wander around, cause trouble, get into all sorts of mischief, but also would very much be like somebody who tears down like the arrogant and the rich and the cruel, and uplift those who were often considered on the lower end of society. So the story pretty much goes, it's a children's story, by the way. It's an incredibly well done, beautiful children's story. And it's basically goes around the point where Herschel is wandering around Europe like he does, and he comes across this village on the first night of Hanukkah, and he's like, "Oh, great, I'm going to hang around here. We're going to celebrate. We're going to light the menorah, enjoy the festivities, eat some latkes. It'll be great." Turns out, though, this village can't do it because the synagogue is haunted by goblins, and very nasty ones at that, who just come and terrorize the locals if they try to do any celebrations. And the only way you can get rid of these goblins is if you go to the haunted synagogue and spend a night, every night of Hanukkah there, and then at the final night somehow trick the Goblin King, who very much is not David Bowie, but something much, much worse, into lighting the menorah. And then and only then will the evil like powers be broken. So Herschel has to use nothing but his wits, his humor, and his spine, essentially, to spend a night each night in the synagogue and somehow bring Hanukkah back to this village, while at the same point not getting eaten. It's really funny. It's has some beautiful illustrations that are both like hilarious and also really kind of spooky and terrifying. Though I think if you're a kid, you'll still enjoy it. Like, I don't think it's scary enough for children, but that's just me. I think they'd be delighted in this. Also, it just I really just can't give enough praise to this. It is such a wonderfully written, just beautiful children's story that I think any person, regardless of age or religion for that matter, can enjoy. So 12 out of 10. Just please read this if you can. I am so happy I just had this brought back to my life. And last, but definitely not least, we are getting away from, I guess, the holidays, but still in kind of the more fantasy traditions. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clark. For those who are wondering, I am still reading this book because this is 3 books written like pretty much molded into one. It's about like 1,000, I think it's over 1,000 pages, but pretty much the premise is that it takes place in early 19th century England, and it's similar to events are following us are similar to our world, with the exception that it's a known fact that magic used to exist in this world, and now it's gone. Magic wasn't just fantasy. There were wizards and there were magicians and witches, and then one day it disappeared. And people are just like, you have a lot of people who talk about it and are philosophical about it and trying to figure out how, what happened. And then one day it's uncovered that there is this gentleman by the name of Mr. Norrell, who actually is a bona fide wizard. He can do magic, and he gets, as a result, he kind of rises to fame, and he is becoming kind of like the court magician, not as a joke, but literal like advisor and such. And eventually it's discovered that there's another gentleman by the name of Jonathan Strange, who's also a wizard. And this story is pretty much about their relationship, because at first they're delighted to know each other, and they're also highly well respected by society at large, but they also have very different methods of going about practicing magic. Like, Mr. Norrell is very much Mr. Norrell. It's, you can say Norrell or Norrell. They actually say it. I'm back and forth. He's much more of a, the end, like practicality of it. He's not really for flashy like thunderbolts or lightning or something. He actually is just like, okay, I'm going to fix something. Great. That's the end of it. Why are you people like upset that I didn't like have a fireworks display? And Jonathan Strange is very much more of a younger, more like flashy kind of guy who just, you know, you come for a show, he gives you it. He's not like a shallow person, but he also kind of knows what the people want. And it's about their how their characters clash. And what I really found interesting about this story is a couple things. I think Susanna Clarke does a great job, like not vilifying other individual. I don't think you are. I personally wasn't like thinking, oh, I dislike one person, I like this person. I think they're very believable and very fleshed out. Also, she introduces like the fair folk or fairies into this story, and they're terrifying. They're one of the most frightening traditions of like fairies out there. Like if you make a deal with one, I don't know, you're better off making a deal with the devil. It's because they are just so unpredictable and whimsical and cruel. But I really like it. The only problem is it is a very, very, very long book. And I've been working at this for some time. But if you got time and you like fantasy and you kind of like historical fiction, fantastical fiction, I would give this a go. And for those of you who are not, who like Susanna Clarke's writing style but don't have time to like actually read it, maybe Paranasi, her newest book, would be a better recommendation because it's much more smaller and it could give you an idea of whether or not you'd like that style. But in any case, thank you so much. And I'm going to give it over to my esteemed colleague, Liz.
Hi, everybody. Good job, Greg. I haven't thought of Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins in like 15 years. So while you were talking, I actually went on the Minuteman Library Network mobile app and requested a copy. Shout out to MLN mobile app. Anyways, all right, that wasn't nerdy at all. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about a couple of titles, two of which I loved and one of which I hated. All right. So my first title that I'm going to talk about today, also look at this cute squirrel, this fluffy little tail, and it's eating an acorn, a small apple, and I don't know. All right. My first book is The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. This is the first title that I've read by Louise Erdrich, and I loved it. I'm going to absolutely read more of books by her. So Tuki is the main character, and she is an avid reader. She's a bookstore employee. She's an Ojibwe woman, and was also previously incarcerated for transporting a corpse with cocaine taped in its armpits across state lines, which is a lot. So she's put all that behind her. She's gotten married to Pollock, who is also Ojibwe, and she's a wildly talented saleswoman at a Native American focused bookstore, which incidentally is also owned by a famous Indigenous author named Louise, because for those who don't know, Louise Erdrich owns Birch Bark Books in Minneapolis, which is on my bucket list of bookstores to visit because apparently it's a fantastic place according to everything that I've read and heard. Okay, so this book takes place over 1 year. On November 1st, 2019, Tuki's most aggravating customer, a white woman who insists that she's actually Native, named Flora, dies. But then her ghost starts haunting Tuki at the bookstore. And it starts off with little mild things like shuffling noises, a book falling down, but then it starts to get a little more violent. Over the course of the calendar year, November 1st, 2019 to November 1st, 2020, a lot happened. Folks might remember. We had the coronavirus pandemic start. We had so many things. And Erdrich takes us through that time period really well, almost too well, in fact. She goes through the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent protests for racial and social justice, all of us adjusting to different news every day about the coronavirus, and how to, take care of ourselves and prevent that. So it really brought me back, like, in an incredibly visceral way. Like, I had to put the book down because, like, my heart was racing, not because it was scary, but because I was just like right back in April of 2020, not knowing what's going on and being like, I can't see my parents until this is over, like it made me nauseous, like, but I kept reading it because it was so good. So I'm not actually going to go into the plot much because I just want to focus on how well Erdrich captured the panic and confusion that most people probably felt. And it covers so much, like what makes a family, how our pasts shape our future, our relationships with our spouses and partners. It's human, it's thoughtful. It talks about cultural appropriation. It's a fantastic read and I highly recommend it. My next book, I 100% don't recommend, and I'm about to say mean things about it. So Laird Barron, if you're watching, skip ahead. All right. Usually I like to talk about books that I enjoyed because I want all of you lovely people to go out and read them and enjoy them yourselves. But that is not the case with this book. This book is The Croning by Laird Barron. And I was so sold from the moment I heard about it. It's about an esoteric cult and it has the word crone in the title. And I am nothing if not a crone in the body of a 35-year-old librarian. I was so sold. But I hated this book so much. Even my cat hated it and tried to prevent me from finishing it as I was hate reading it to get to the end. Buddy, you tried to help. I should have listened to you. You're wise. You're wise. You have no thumbs, but you're very wise. Okay, so Don Miller is a bumbling 80-year-old retired geologist who lives in the Pacific Northwest with his vibrant wife, Michelle, who's also 80. Michelle is an anthropologist who is always jetting off to one remote area of the world or another, even in her 80s. Over the course of the novel, we learn that Michelle is actually otherworldly and somewhat nefarious. In my opinion, this book is just a misogynist take on The Whisperer in Darkness by H.P. Lovecraft. If you haven't read that, it's H.P. Lovecraft, so problematic, but like solid cosmic horror. Barron's writing ranges so greatly between boring as dirt and like fast-paced, like Lovecraftian style cosmic horror, but it's too much on the boring as dirt side. Every single woman that is presented and introduced in this book is someone who has secrets and comes across very negatively. Don, again, an absent-minded dullard, realizes he's in his 80s and he might be slipping into dementia. But guess what? It's not dementia. It's these powerful women around him that are causing his brain to slowly die. Sorry for the spoilers. It's the internet. It's caused by his powerful wife. Like, she's so powerful that his brain is dying because it just can't handle how powerful she is. So I had such high hopes for this Lovecraftian homage, but unfortunately, Barron really only replicated the in-depth, boring minutia punctuated by unspeakable horrors, xenophobia, and the misogyny of H.P. Lovecraft. 0 out of 10. Truly hated this book and do not plan to read any of Laird Barron's other titles. Sorry. Do better next time. My next book, though, I recommend to everyone. It's The Magical World of Strega Nona. Shout out to my sister for reminding me that Strega Nona existed. So if you grew up in the United States, it's very likely that you read at least one picture book by Tommy DePaula. I thought his name was pronounced Tommy. It's pronounced Tommy. Learned that today. For those who aren't familiar with Strega Nona, she is a magical old woman living in Italy who has adventures. Her name means Grandma Witch, and she's basically my life goal. She has a magic pot that makes endless pasta. She can cure a headache with a hairpin and has a never-ending vegetable garden. She is generous, kind, and always willing to help people solve their problems. This treasury combines all of the Strega Nona stories, as well as commentary from DePaula about what he was thinking going into each one and sort of what his mindset was, which was really interesting to me. And I absolutely recommend this book for anyone who is currently still alive, regardless of age, pulse mandatory, that's all. I want to live in the magical world of Stregonona and drown in her pasta pot. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Louise. I forgot who was going next. Not going to lie. Who's next?
Louise.
Thank goodness.
Okay. That was great, Liz. That was absolutely great. I also love Stregonona, and absolutely, if your cat pans a book, that's it. You don't read it. That's lesson learned for all of us. Okay. Let me just make sure I'm at the beginning of this. Hold on one second, you guys. Sorry. Just the beginning. All right. Okay. So I wanted to start with this book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. You guys, this is a classic. Being a little retro here. Can you not see my screen? Okay, you guys, I'm sorry about that. Let me just get out of here, and you guys can't see the screen, I hear. So let's end this. Typical Louise, huh? All right, here we go. Let's try this again. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry guys, I apologize. Let's get this started. All right. Here we go. We're starting with Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. You guys, this is a classic book. I have been around the block a time or two, and I've been hearing about this book for many, many years. I recently went away for a week, and I picked this book up actually in a library in Puerto Rico. They had a take one, leave one bookshelf. And I love this book. I really love it. It really is about Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. It's a very philosophical book, and the main character is doing, he calls it a chautauqua, kind of like a lecture series, but he's sort of doing it in his own mind, and we're sharing it with him. And he talks about how and this seems true to me in our experience, they're kind of people who are classical, and classical people are the people who, in a motorcycle example, they're going to want to know how do all the parts work. They're going to want to fix the parts. They're going to want to really analyze what's what. And if they're on a trip, they're going to feel so much better knowing that they can fix that screw or that nut bolt, or I'm probably not even saying the names of the parts correctly because I'm not a classical person. I'm a romantic person, and the romantic person is kind of big picture and just like, okay, let's take it to the shop and make sure it's running, and then I'll get on my motorcycle. And he's talking about how people often separate these sort of things, but they shouldn't really be separated because there's actually a romantic aspect to the classical, and that when you're trying to fix a motorcycle or anything, this is all applicable to life as well. Like if you have a thing in your mind, like the winch goes here, or I read this in the manual, and the main character is taking his son on a trip like from Montana, from the Dakotas out to Montana and then to California. He's going on a long trip with these friends, and he's sort of thinking about contemplating these kind of things, and that if your mind is fixed, like I do everything the way it says in the manual, even for like my blender or my vacuum or whatever, then you're not open to what you're not seeing, and you're not sort of relaxing your mind and letting other things come in. And I think this applies to everything in life. And I think this is important. And it's the kind of thing when you're in college, or when I was in college, I loved thinking about things like this. I mean, I read the Don Juan books, the Carlos Castaneda books, and I read a lot of the Beat Generation books like Jack Kerouac. And I like to think about thinking. And I I think if our thinking is limited, we don't see things with fresh eyes, or if we have a closed mind about technology, like it's bad, like one of his friends seemed to have that kind of mind about technology, and his friend's wife, but the friend was like, I just get my motorcycle fixed at the dealer. And the main character would worry like, well, what if something goes wrong and you're not near a place that can fix it? And meantime, they're going through nature, and he's noticing, like when he's in the city, people kind of are just in their cars and they're just sort of looking ahead, and they don't seem in tune with the world, or even happy for that matter. And I don't know, this is a lovely book. I recommend it. Very philosophical, but beautiful scenery, harmony with nature, just thinking about how we think and how our minds can be closed sometimes, and how we're looking to get to a destination, but we're not really in the present moment because we're thinking about our debt. Like even when I'm reading the book, I'm thinking, all right, when are you going to finish this trip? But I'm not staying with him and his philosophical talk was, and I actually love them. I recommend this book highly. It actually, even though this is before the internet and before social media, it's questioning things about the way we think and the way we've developed the world and what are we doing, and maybe we should think about how we're thinking. I think all of it's relevant now just as much as when he wrote it. Okay, the next book is a poetry book that is so beautifully written. I don't read poetry a lot. I like poetry, but this book is, first of all, let me just say it's very accessible. The poems really speak beautifully. The wording is magnificent. The author was actually incarcerated at one point in his life, and now he lobbies to help people in prison. He lobbies to get them good reading material, to get them books. I thought maybe I'd just read you a little bit from one of his poems, just a little. This particular poem is called When I Think of Tamir Rice While Driving. In the back seat, my sons laugh and tussle, far from Tamir's age, adorned with his complexion and cadence, and already warned about toy pistols, though my rhetoric ain't about fear, but dislike, about how guns have haunted me since I first gripped a pistol. I think of Tamir, twice blink, and confront my weeping's inadequacy, how some loss invents the geometry that baffles. The Second Amendment, cold, cruel, a constitutional violence, a ruthless thing worrying me still. Should be it predicts the heft in my hand, arm sag, burdened by what I bear. I'm going to stop there, but the writing is beautiful, and he has some poems where you can see like lines crossed out like a big redacted document, and they're about people who are being tried in the courtroom, and the way the words work with the redacted documents are making statements about what goes on in the courtroom and people going to jail. And it's beautiful. It captures despair, it captures poverty, it captures mass incarceration, but there's also a wit and a transcendence to it. I really recommend this book highly. And last, another very retro book that I bought in the airport, heading on my trip. This is The Lone Ranger and Tonto, Fist Fight in Heaven. This is a great book. I really recommend it. Sherman Alexie is just such a fine writer. We've got people in Spokane on a reservation. This is a book of short stories, but I feel like it coheres as a novel. In a lot of the books, we have the same main character, Victor, and we have him kind of growing up in the book. And then even some of the stories that don't have Victor are in the same community. I just feel like it coheres as a novel, but all the short stories, as great short stories do, are perfect slices of life, beautifully told. You know, it's kind of we've got people on a reservation, they have like no money, they have like HUD houses, they've got like, you know, government issued cheese and milk, and they're struggling with that. And, you know, there's a lot about basketball. Apparently Sherman Alexie himself was a basketball player in his youth, and you know, sort of transcending through basketball, but then maybe giving into despair and drinking and falling into alcoholism. And it's about poverty. It's about, you know, having your own culture and having another culture on top of it that's sort of crushing your culture, and how to come to terms with that growing up in white America, but being Native American. And it's a fantastic book. I can't recommend it enough. And with that, I want to turn it over to my highly esteemed colleague, Laura.
Thank you, Louise. So I'm going to share my screen, and because I'm the host, I feel like weird stuff always happens. So let's see. You're just gonna hear my voice and not see me. So, but you can see my whole screen. So first up is What the Fireflies Knew by Kai Harris. I'm lucky enough to read an advanced reader copy of this book. This is actually due to come out in February. In 1995, KB and her sister Nia, so this is a novel, moved from Detroit, Michigan to Lansing, Michigan to live with their grandfather after the death of their father and the loss of their home to their father's debts. I'm still in the middle of reading this book, which is beautifully, beautifully descriptive in a way this background picture is. See what I did there? The book opens with a bang with KB finding her father's body, and it hooks you right from the first page. If I can just read you a brief passage. This is KB describing finding her father. His skin, once deep brown, had turned dull gray, like the sky when it rains and rains, and the sun hides behind full clouds till it's too late to go out and play. I mean, that's literally like the fifth sentence of the book. It hooked me so much. A fun fact, once upon a time, I feel like everyone wanted to be a writer. I know I'm not original in that way, but the reason I gave it up is that nothing I ever wrote or will write will even come close to that. After reading a lot of writing like that, I said, nope, that's fine. I'd rather just read beautiful writing. So thank you. You're all spared from the direct I would have written most likely. There are also some lovely details in this book. Some fun pop culture ones, such as the fact the family actually names their car Carol Ann after the little girl in Poltergeist, which I thought was brilliant. So I can't wait really to read more of this. And for all of you to discover this book when it comes out in just under 2 months, you can put a hold on it now in the Minuteman catalog or the app, or the Lit app or Overdrive website. You can also get it as an ebook. So my next book is A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. It's a middle grade book. I also just started this book, but I have a feeling that I'll finish it very quickly, probably tonight when I get home from work. It's so hard to put down. I hesitate to call the pace quick, however, as it's really descriptive and lyrical, which makes for a nice leisurely read, although fast read too, which I know is a bit of a contradiction. Addie, the character, is on the spectrum and is having trouble finding anyone to understand her. The book starts off in a very sad and harrowing way for any of us who've actually ever been to school as a child. A teacher is admonishing Addie right in front of her classmates about her handwriting and basically saying that her handwriting is babyish. Since it's told from the first person, we really feel Addie's discomfort and pain as she's being chastised, especially right in front of her former best friend. It's just, the first few pages are just incredibly heartbreaking as you really just live this scene. Addie feels connection with sharks, the animal, and as well as those who were persecuted during the Salem witch trials, because she feels that they are beings who are who people didn't quite understand, and she feels a kinship with that. And I have to say, bonus points to McNichol for including a librarian as one of the sympathetic adult characters. So my third and last book is an oldie but a goodie for me. It's the Calvin 10th anniversary book by Bill Watterson. Depending on your age and generation, there were most likely must-reads in the funnies pages for you. Did anyone else read Brenda Starr? I used to love that comic. Anyway, for a lot of you, that may have been the Peanuts, not Peanuts, by Charles Schulz. But for me, it was first and foremost Calvin and Hobbes, with The Far Side running a distant second. For anyone not familiar with Calvin and Hobbes, it's the story of Calvin. He's one with the blonde hair and the red t-shirt. He's a 6-year-old boy with a very active imagination, and his stuffed tiger, Hobbes, who Hobbes either comes alive when no one else is watching, or Calvin imagines him coming alive. And honestly, it really doesn't matter which one it is, because it just doesn't. If you read it, you'll know. This may not sound to you like something terribly interesting or funny. Well, you're wrong. Reading Calvin and Hobbes as an adult does not diminish its charm or humor for me. In fact, I feel like it enhanced it. I do find myself having more sympathy for the adult characters in the comic strips, such as the parents, who are just so tired all the time, as well as his teacher, Mrs. Wormwood, and even more than ever, the evil babysitter, Rosalind. Although truthfully, when I was reading this, I was doing a lot of babysitting. I was in middle school and high school. And so I actually have always been kind of team Rosalind, because I'm pretty sure I babysat for a Calvin or two in my time. Whether you're revisiting Calvin and Hobbes, or you're meeting them for the first time, this is a great way to do it. I actually own, I'm pretty sure, every Calvin and Hobbes collection, and that was a very sad day when Bill Watterson stopped doing the comic. For those who are fans, I also recommend the documentary that I highlight here, Dear Mr. Watterson. You can actually view this on Hoopla, and it's all about the origin of the comic, as well as the elusive creator. Bill Watterson does not give many interviews, and yeah, so those are my books. So I'm going to put this now into gallery view and ask if anyone has some TV shows or movies they've seen lately. I think, Louise, you said you saw something.
Yeah, actually, the two that I watched were on Canopy, and one of them's an older movie. It's called Love Affair. It's from 1939, and it has Charles Boyer and Irene Dunn, and I really liked it. It's a little bit schlocky schmaltzy. You sort of have to go with that, but they're on a cruise ship. She's kind of like a socialite, and he's kind of like, everybody seems to have a crush on him. I wasn't quite sure why, but anyway, they kind of fall in love, but they're already betrothed to other people, and so they leave the ship and go to their other people, but they have a deal. She feels like he should learn how to earn a living, and so they're going to meet in 6 months on the top of the Empire State Building and see what happens. So 6 months come and they're about to meet. Something happens. I'm not going to say what, no spoilers, but it's very romantic, and I don't know, I liked it. I like these old movies. I liked it a lot. The other movie I want to talk about is Dim Sum, A Little Bit of Heart. This was also on Canopy. This is a lovely story about a woman who's in her 60s. She's Chinese, but she's living in San Francisco in Chinatown. Her daughter's there, and their Uncle Tan is there. Her husband had died. She heard from a fortune teller that she's going to die, so she's worried she's going to die. She kind of wants her daughter to get married off before she dies, and so there's sort of this pressure on the daughter, who has a boyfriend who she's not sure she really wants to marry, and she's kind of worried about her mom. And then her mom goes off to China, and again, I don't want to give any spoilers, but the sort of the rub is this woman going to die? The fortune teller said she would. Everybody's kind of worried. It's lovely, the camaraderie among the family, and the woman who plays her daughter. It's just charming. It's just a charming piece. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Louise, it's interesting. You're talking about Love Affair. And at first I said, no, that's An Affair to Remember. And I just looked it up, and I never knew Love Affair, An Affair to Remember was a remake of Love Affair. And I feel like poor Love Affair, because everyone talks about An Affair to Remember, but it's basically, but it came out first in 1939.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know about the remake.
Oh yeah, the Affair to Remember is a Cary Grant and Deborah Carr. It's the exact same story. So, but Love Affair was first. And of course, 1939 was such a famous year for movies. Wizard of Oz came out then. And, Sleepless in Seattle, if anyone's ever watched that,
Yeah.
talks about An Affair to Remember constantly, like Rita Wilson's like crying about the climax. Sleepless in Seattle lied to us because An Affair to Remember was not an original movie. And Irene Dunn and Charles Boyer are great actors. I don't understand why that one hasn't, why is that not the movie everyone's talking about? So now I want to go watch Love Affair and rewatch
They
An
were
Affair to
great in
Remember.
this film. I mean, they did a great job.
So that's very fascinating. I learned something new. I'm embarrassed to say. And again, like 1939, like people talk about that year a lot for movies. And I'm embarrassed that I did not know that. So thank you. That I learned something new. So speaking of remakes, I actually did a bit of a musical binge recently, which sounds probably delightful for half the people on our panel and torture for the other half. I know a couple of other coworkers here who this would be their definition of literally a torture chamber, but in the span of a couple weeks, I saw Tick, Tick, Boom on Netflix. I watched The Pajama Game on Amazon Prime. I watched Annie Live. Yes, I did, on NBC. And I also watched the remake of West Side Story. And I have to say, full disclosure, I'm a huge show tunes musical person. I loved all four. Very different. In terms of Tick, Tick, Boom and Pajama Game, which were both new to me. Tick, Tick, Boom, just real quickly, for those who are not familiar with it, is basically Jonathan Larson, who is most well known for writing Rent, the Broadway musical Rent. He did a one-man show about kind of his struggles as a sort of a struggling artist, if you will. And that was Tick, Tick, Boom. After he very sadly passed away of an aortic aneurysm, I think at 35, very young, right before Rent opened, actually. Tick, Tick, Boom was sort of reimagined as a three-person musical in the early 2000s, and then just became a movie, expanded more, directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's great. I really liked it. I'm not a huge Rent person. I like some of the music. I don't think it's aged terribly well. I won't go into my thoughts on that because you get me talking about show tunes or Broadway and you'll be so bored in an hour because I won't stop talking. Tick, Tick, Boom was a really pleasant surprise. I thought Andrew Garfield also, he stars in it, not generally a musical person. I was very excited. There's a Broadway actor, Joshua Henry, who was in it, who I actually saw live in a Broadway production in 2018. And that was very exciting. I was like, ooh, I saw him live on stage. And it's really like a nice love letter, I feel like, to that industry, as well as people who love theater, and especially I think right now theater is very much struggling right now. I'm sure you've all been paying attention to a lot of these shows in New York that have been temporarily having to close. So, but there's one scene in there in particular, I won't spoil it, that if you are a musical fan, you will. And then The Pajama Game is just, I was very familiar with the music. I know all the songs. That's just real quickly. It's a musical from the 50s. It's about a pajama factory. It's about to go on strike. They're lobbying for a very highly deserved raise. And basically the union leader and the new superintendent have a romance, and sort of how that kind of gets in the way, or how the work situation gets in the way of their romance. It's Doris Day's in the movie. John Raitt reprises his Broadway role. I liked it. I mean, yes, it's a 1950s musical and there are some things that haven't aged well, but I have to say, compared to their counterparts, for shows from that time that get revived a lot more, I actually think it stood the test of time more than some of those have. And Doris Day's character, Babe is her name. She actually is a very independent woman, especially for a 1950s show. And I think the storyline about these employees that are just not really getting their fair share, and really, unfortunately, it's very timely, especially, I don't know if everyone has been following the recent Kellogg's news, and of course with Amazon. So it's just very interesting. And there's a lot of great songs in there that I bet people would recognize that would not know were from the Pajama Game. So just Hernando's Hideaway, Steam Heat, and Hey There. I'm not going to sing them because A, I don't want a copyright violation, and B, you will run away screaming because I can't sing. Annie Live. I loved it. I mean, I have to admit, Annie is not everyone's bag. I mean, not only is Broadway torture to people, I feel like Annie is an extra torture to people, and I totally get it. I have a special attachment to Annie, partly, you know, the curly hair thing. My hair used to be much curlier than it is now, even. It's definitely Annie curly. It was the first live Broadway show I ever saw. I saw it when I was 4 years old, 1979. It had been open for 2 years. Saw Allison Smith as Annie, Alice Ghostley as Miss Hannigan. Saw it in New York. We had front row seats. My mother and I had to trade for ones in the balcony because somebody was afraid of the dog jumping on them. And so we had to switch seats to someone because I wouldn't go in otherwise. Yeah, I regret that 42 years later. But I've seen this is the fourth camera version, on-screen version of Annie, and honestly, it's the best one. I think it's the truest of the play. I did love the 1982 movie, which was the first. I saw it several times, but the older I got, the more I realized like it's actually not that good. Although it did introduce me to Bernadette Peters and Anne Ryan King, so it gets points for that. But the movie cut out a lot of great songs, and it takes place in the summer. Second one, there's a made-for-TV movie years ago that I think I'm probably the only person that remembers this version. Audra McDonald is in it, which key. That one was fine. There's another version of 2 years ago that takes place now, or takes place contemporary. That one was different enough that the changes in that one didn't bother me as much. Although Cameron Diaz is Miss Hannigan. No, sorry. This one was just great. The singing was amazing. The little girl who played Annie was gorgeous singing voice. And also, as I can't take credit for this, one of the reviews I read said she was also really good at acting, which was amazing. Like a lot of times, especially, you know, on stage, they're so over enunciating. But she was just really good. And Taraji Henson played Miss Hannigan, and that was probably my favorite version of the song Little Girls. I have to say, as an adult, I think I horrifyingly find myself relating more to Miss Hannigan. Not that much. I mean, I would be much nicer if I was running an orphanage, I promise. But and Nicole Scherzinger of the Pussycat Dolls as Grace, what a find that was. So yeah, it was great. If you can track it down, I highly recommend it. I watched it because I felt like it was Annie, and I have a nostalgia for Annie, and I'm like, I'm just gonna watch it. And I absolutely loved it. It is far and away the best of the filmed adaptations. So go check it out if Annie is not something that makes you want to run away screaming. And the West Side Story, I just saw the new version of West Side Story. I also, like Annie, have a bit of nostalgia for West Side Story, not to the same extent. I did not see it as a 4-year-old in the theater. Probably would have been a lot for a 4-year-old, but we had the record when I was a kid of the original Broadway cast. And I also saw the original movie, the 1961 movie. And I always liked it. I loved music, and I've seen it on stage a couple times, including the 2009, I think it was, revival, which Lin-Manuel Miranda actually rewrote some of the lyrics, for those who do not know that. So this remake, a lot of people were like, why? But it's Steven Spielberg. And first of all, the one thing that he does is in the 1961 movie, those who don't know West Side Story, it's real quick. It's just a modern take on Romeo and Juliet. Instead of two rival families, it's rival street gangs in New York in the 1950s. One is the Jets, and one is the Sharks. The Sharks are they are of Puerto Rican descent. The Jets are, they don't actually say, I think in the original, but they're white. In this movie, they're Italian and Irish. And in the 1961 movie, the Sharks were mostly played by people who are not Hispanic, not Hispanic descent. Natalie Wood played Maria, the female lead, who her parents were Russian. George Chakiris plays Bernardo, the leader of the Sharks. He's Greek. Rita Moreno does play Anita, who is Bernardo's girlfriend and Maria's friend. And Rita Moreno, for those of you who don't know, although how dare you if you don't know Rita Moreno, she is from Puerto Rico. And this remake really does rectify that, but basically anyone of the characters playing the sharks are of Hispanic descent. And Rita Moreno is in it. She plays a new character who I think works very well. I thought this was beautiful. I thought it took pretty much the best of the original movie, Rita Moreno being one of them, as well as the Stephen Sondheim changed lyrics of America for the 1961 movie for the better, I think. And they kept the 1961 movie lyrics for America, which I was very glad. But it really added a lot of, really fleshed out a lot of characters, especially the character of Chino. For those who are familiar with that, no spoiler alert, but Chino is a very pivotal character, but very one-dimensional in the stage show and in the 1961 movie. And they really give him a lot more development, to the point where I actually was maybe shipping the wrong couple at one point. But it's just and real singers are in it. It's just, anyway, I could go on about it. I loved it. I cried at the end. I think there's probably a conversation to be had about some things that don't work with it. And I agree. I probably do agree with most of what I heard, but it's amazing. Ariana DeBose as Anita, just dancing, and it really, and the story really hit me about how it was tragic in a way that it hadn't before. And I think to just simply say it's a remake of Romeo and Juliet, I think really simplifies what West Side Story is and really what it's trying to say. And Tony Kushner, who wrote the screenplay for this, who is probably most well known, at least to me, as writing Angels in America, really adds this framing device and basically about something that was going on historically in New York around the time that it's happening in the Upper West Side. I don't want to, again, spoil it, but I thought it was very clever, especially what the thing he's talking about represents to the theater world is so important, but yet also represents in a bad way. And I thought that was brilliant, especially if any of you know anyone who was in New York around the time that this was happening. Anyway, I loved it. I want to see it again. I did go to a theater to see it. I have not been to theater much since the pandemic. The last time I went on and on about, that was Ghostbusters, and I regretted that. I did not regret this at all. And I want to see it again. And it was beautiful. I mean, if you like West Side Story, I honestly don't think this would ruin the 1961 movie for you if you're a fan of that. I personally thought this was better, but I also had a lot of issues with the 1961 movie. Yeah, it was great. So if you love musicals, go see all four of those movies. If you hate musicals, you will hate every single one of these movies. I guarantee it. Maybe West Side Story you might like. Maybe. You definitely won't like Pajama Game. Or Annie. Anyway. So on that note, thank you all so much. I don't know if have any of I'm assuming none of you saw Annie live or anything. The two of you. No,
no.
Not so
I'm dying to see. I'm dying to see West Side Story.
It's very good. I highly recommend it. That's our show, and that's our year. Again, thank you for everyone. We've been doing this almost a year and a half. We started in August of 2020, and we look forward to continue doing this into 2022. So thank you, everyone, and take care.